Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Discriminating Gamer. You know, my grandfather always used to say, fight fire with fire. He was a great man. Not the best firefighter, though. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at Iron Blood, Snow and Mud from Phalanx Games.
We'll get back to the review in just a moment. I want to take a minute to ask you to check out my other channel, that is Cody Carlson PhD, where we talk about history, books on history, military history. I even post some of my lectures for my classes on there. Please check that out. Please subscribe to that channel. And now, back to the review.
Iron Blood, Snow and Mud is a two-player operational war game on the Eastern Front during the Second World War II. The players take on the role of either the Red Army or the Wehrmacht as they battle for dominance in Russia. The game board depicts a map from German territory in the west all the way through to Moscow in the east. Players are going to go ahead and deploy their various forces on the board. Now, initially, the Germans, of course, have a lot of forces deployed right there along the border. The Soviets have more spread out and smaller forces throughout the game board. At the top of the board, you essentially have the timeline, the round tracker, which is 1941 through 1944. Players are going to go ahead and place tokens on certain years there, which are going to come into play later in the game. Now, the game board has a number of terrain tiles, including city tiles, which also have kind of victory point indicators on them. And you also have on the game board, on the turn tracker, the three different seasons. Essentially, you have mud, clear, and snow. There will be different penalties or advantages depending on which part of the year you are fighting. During each season, you'll have a series of sequences depending on what you do. Now, the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at fleet and air support. Now, in the Baltic and the Black Sea, you're going to have a Soviet and a German ship that can provide support to any of the locations that are adjacent to it during the game. They can also help for supply, more on that later. But what you're going to do is the Germans start out with 4 aircraft, the Soviets with 1. And so the Germans are going to be able to assign aircraft where they think battles will take place over the course of the round. Now, your land units are tanks and infantry, and they can move at this time. There's 3 different kinds of movement. There's a simple advance, meaning you can just move into the next adjacent hex. Next, you have convoy. Essentially, if you have an unbroken chain of units, you can move one unit from one part of that chain to the other side of that chain, essentially moving your units very rapidly. Now, your tanks also have a blitz ability. If they move on an advance, you can roll a die to see if they can move again, and they think they can do that a couple of times. And that is also dependent upon the season. Next, you're going to go to combat resolution. So essentially, players are going to essentially add up all of the combat strength they have. So infantry gets 2 combat points, tanks get 3 combat points. If you're in a fortress, you get an additional 4 combat points. Adjacent friendly infantry units also give 1 combat point, provided they're not engaged in their own battle. Any friendly air or sea unit, which is in that hex, they will also grant 1 additional combat point to the battle. You also get 1 combat die if you are in a friendly controlled urban location. Now, since urban locations have multiple hexes, you would have had to have controlled all the hexes since the previous round in order to claim that extra combat point. So whatever your combat strength is, players will roll that number of die. Now, the die themselves only have a 1, 2, or 3 facing on it. So players are going to go ahead, they're going to roll the die, and whoever has the greater number wins that combat. Now, if a unit is defeated, it has to retreat. It cannot retreat into terrain obstacles, or if there are other units around it, you can only have 1 unit in a space per time. If it can't retreat, that unit is eliminated. Now, next is anti-partisan activity. If any Axis forces had moved into a space with a partisan unit, that partisan unit is eliminated. There's no combat. They're just out of the game. Essentially, next you do a victory check. If the Germans have taken over every hex in a city, then they can go ahead and claim that city as theirs. It becomes their city, and they get the associated points with it. Now, if the Soviets have taken control of any urban hexes in any original German territory, the Germans lose immediately. If the Germans succeed in conquering a city which is where Stalin currently is located, then the Soviets lose immediately. Next, players have to be able to trace supplies. So essentially, to trace a supply line for the Germans, you have to be able to trace an unbroken chain of supply that is not blocked by obstacles, not blocked by rivers, all the way back to their starting bases. Any unit that cannot trace that line of supply back is immediately eliminated. Soviet units and Soviet partisans can actually block the German supply line, so it's in the Germans' best interest to clear those partisans as soon as they can. Next, the factions go ahead and recall their air fleets back to their airfields and their sea fleets back to their respective seas. Next, you have the reinforcements phase. The Soviets can place infantry in any urban area that has not been conquered, and there are certain factory cities located on the board where they can go ahead and place tanks. Next, a Soviet player is going to roll a die, and depending on what that die number is, they can place a number of partisans anywhere on the board trying to block the Germans from line of supply. The Soviet player can also attempt to move Stalin at this time. They can go ahead, they can roll a die on a roll of 2 or 3, they can move Stalin to another city, but they can only move Stalin once during the game. For the final step, players are going to go ahead and advance the turn marker. They're going to look at the initiative track. And if these Germans get any of their special tokens, they can reveal those. Those tokens have all sorts of potential goodies. It may give them an extra move or a way to manipulate dice, or it may give them a chance to actually bring another infantry unit onto the board. Soviets also have similar tokens that they can pull from. They have some of the similar ways to manipulate dice, but they also have things like they can deploy an extra partisan unit during the partisan phase. Now, during that victory check phase, if the Germans have destroyed a fortress and hold either Moscow or 3 of the industrial centers, they instantly win the game. Or if they ever capture the city in which Stalin is located, they instantly win the game. Now, again, the Soviets win if they can control a city in any of the original German territory, or if by the end of the 1944 phase the Germans have not won, then the Soviets win. Iron blood, snow and mud. Well, just look at that cover. I mean, look at that cover. That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of painting that just gets World War II enthusiasts like me excited, right? Seeing a Tiger tank like that. It's just a cool thing. It's just a cool painting. It's a cool cover. I was really excited. I'm a big fan of Eastern Front games, and I like I like war games that have a level of strategic depth, but don't take 2 or 3 days to play. Games you can play in just a few hours. I really like war games that really have that depth, but are again not prohibitively long or complex. And this is a great kind of mid-level, easy to learn, easy to play, and relatively short playtime World War II game. I really enjoyed it quite a bit. Played this with Ray. We played this, and it's a game of real choices and tough choices. The Germans start off so strong. You're thinking, now there's no way. You look at the relative strengths, and the Soviets are weak. There's no way Germans are going to lose this game. But as the Germans advance and they're taking losses and they can't replace those losses, and the Soviets can replace their losses, and they're getting stronger and stronger as the Germans are moving forward and getting weaker and weaker. And heaven help you if you're a German and you get stuck in certain areas where you can't easily be reinforced, because when those partisans come out, they're going to go in places that screw you and eliminate those units. So that's fun and scary too. But just seeing, for the Soviets, seeing that tide coming toward you and desperately thinking, do I move Stalin? No, Stalin's okay for now. Should I move? No, he's okay for now. Because there's some real choices there as well, and that's really cool. The game, I really like, too, the combat system here because, on one hand, it's a numbers game. You're trying to add up all the numbers you can so you get your combat strength. But then it still comes down to dice rolls, right? And some of those dice rolls can be very fickle. I really like the 1, 2, or 3 dice roll on them as opposed to just regular D6s here. I really like these die that come with the game, these dice that come with the game. I think it's really, it's a real fun combat system. The point that your combat point strengths essentially are the dice you use to roll. So I really like that. And boy, I had some lousy rolls in this game. But this is fun. It's a great, if you're looking for a really good light, and I say light, I mean, there is a level of complexity, a little bit of a learning curve, but relatively light Eastern Front war game that still really has bite, that is a lot of fun, that is not going to scare away people who are not, hardened grognards. This is perfect. This is a really, really good Eastern Front game. Now, my only real caveat is my favorite part of the game is, well, I shouldn't say my favorite part, but one of my favorite parts of the game is when you get those tokens and you don't know what they're going to do. They're going to give you an extra dice in combat. They're going to allow you to re-roll dice in combat. Do you get another unit? Do you get more movement? What do you get out of these tokens? I really like that and discovering that. At the beginning of the game, you're going to get 4 of those reinforcement tokens, I think, for the Germans, and it comes with 5, so one of them just out of the game. You don't know which one it is. My only caveat is I wish there was a little bit more of that, a little more spice and sugar. I would have loved to have had some kind of event cards in this game that maybe just, every round you got to hand it 2 or 3 cards and you can play 1 card just to give you just something, some little more spice and sugar. I really would have appreciated that, and I thought that was missing. But the game is so, the gameplay is so, as I say, relatively short and involved and fun and interesting. It's not a big deal. That's a personal preference. I wish it would have had that in it. But as it is, it's a fun game. If you're like me and you like these kind of, like I say, mid-weight, easy to get into war games that don't take up a lot of time, I think you'll really get a kick out of this one. Now, before I get lost in my enthusiasm, I always want to do this. I always just want to say, you do have to take that minute to think, I'm playing the Germans or I'm playing the Soviets, and these are both bad guys historically. It's the historian in me. It just leaves a sour taste in my mouth. But I'm not going to stop playing games as Germans or Soviets because I recognize it's a game, right? But it's important to remember the history there too. And these were both just horrible, bloody, evil regimes. So I really got a kick out of this one. I'd love to see more kind of games in this series. If I'm sure they could find ways to do one in, D-Day or whatever, and maybe Battle of the Bulge or something. I think you could do some really fun games with this system. And again, it's light enough and it's easy enough to learn. I think people will get a kick out of it. So recommendation for the discriminating gamer for Iron Blood, Snow and Mud is buy it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment for us here on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We'd ask you to please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. I'd also ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to please check out my other channel, that is Cody Carlson PhD, where we talk about military history, books on history, fun things like that. I even post some of my lectures on that channel. It would mean a lot to me if you would check out that channel and subscribe. And, of course, please leave a thumb to this video on Board Game Geek. And if you are a fan of the channel, I'd ask you to go ahead and click on the Super Thanks button here on the YouTube page and leave a tip. I used to live on a houseboat, and I was in love with the girl next door. But we drifted apart. Please somebody help me on my feet again. And I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I'll be dying. Once a year I wind up in the band. God knows that I love to fight. I gotta ask you. Yeah. You scared? Yeah.